Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Margaret Horan. I'm here this afternoon just to talk about Currencies Direct and how Currencies Direct can help solicitors, as it says on the slide here, cut the admin time for foreign currency transactions. So just a little bit, first of all, about Currencies Direct. We've been operating with solicitors in Ireland for about 9 years now, and we are so far partners with the various entities you can see here on the slide. So we have the Law Society of Ireland, the Law Society of Northern Ireland, local solicitor bar associations, including, for example, Southern Law, West Cork Bar Association, and so on. Horan International, we're a sponsorship partner with them. Solicitors Growth Summit, who I'm here this afternoon with, the Dublin Solicitors Bar Association, Latouche Training, and STEP, who are the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners. We're also the preferred currency partner so far for actually hundreds of Irish solicitor offices all over the country, and that number is growing continuously. So I suppose the idea here this afternoon is just to give people an overview of what exactly it is we do, and if your office doesn't already use us, maybe you might be able to see how potentially we could be of help. So generally for solicitors, they come to us for 3 different types of transactions. So very often it's where there's a conveyancing file and the purchaser is overseas, or sometimes it's that the vendor is overseas. And then again, for the conveyancing files and also for the probate files, you know, there may be an executor sale of an asset, and the beneficiaries of the estate are overseas. So those are typically the 3 scenarios where solicitors would need our help. So I suppose at the moment what we find the issues that arise for solicitors is when there's money coming in from overseas. So you're doing a conveyancing file, the person who's purchasing the property is overseas. So at the moment it's very much kind of a guessing game. So the client will go into their local bank, they need to send, for example, €200,000 to Ireland, although you wouldn't get much for €200,000 nowadays, let's say 300,000, and they go into their bank in, you know, it can be New York, San Francisco, Surfers Paradise, wherever it is, you know, they're given a kind of a rough approximation of how much of the local currency they need to give in order to achieve the value for in euro. The problem is that the number is never going to be right. So what arrives into your client account is going to be either too much or too little. Too much is a problem because you've got to somehow get the surplus back to them. Too little is a problem because you could have your closing of your property purchase delayed, or your client might need to actually come to Ireland, go to the ATM, physically take out cash, bring it to your office. You know, we hear of all these kind of crazy scenarios. Another problem with the incoming payments is that, you know, you're kind of limited in what you can do in terms of your AML regulatory compliance here. So you get your ID, you get your address verification and so on. But after that, then you're kind of in the dark as to, you know, who exactly are you dealing with? And, you know, it has happened quite a few times where Currencies Direct have identified that what the person we're dealing with is a politically exposed person. So it could be a retired High Court judge, somebody whose parents are involved in maybe politics in the United States. How are you supposed to know? And then, of course, there's all that other thing about source of funds and where funds are coming from. So I suppose the thing is that Currencies Direct will do a fairly rigorous assessment before we're happy to place a transaction for a client. So you can be fairly sure if Currencies Direct were happy to go ahead with a transaction, the client is probably okay. If Currencies Direct come back to you and say, listen, I'm really sorry, but we're not in a position to provide a service to your client, well, then you should be looking at the red flags yourself. And then the last point here is just in terms of, you know, international intermediary bank fees. Again, because the overseas bank systems don't talk to the Irish bank systems, what you get is the money has to go from here to here to here to here before it actually gets to your bank account. And every time it gets lobbed from one to the other, that entity is going to apply their own fees, which is fine, kind of, if it gets deducted from the money that's in transit. But if your client at the far side has ticked the fees are going to be covered by the beneficiary, then the money is going to arrive into your bank account, and AIB or Bank of Ireland are going to take a chunk out of it to cover fees, and then you're left short. So it just can be a nightmare for people. The second area then, of course, that's a big problem, is where you're trying to pay money out. And I suppose these are the kinds of problems that we come across all the time. So, for example, somebody is in the United States, they're supposed to get €150,000, that's absolutely fine. Somebody goes to the bank and sends 150,000 and then they put US dollars. So the client is getting the right number, but they're getting the wrong currency. Now, in that regard, it's fine, because what happens is you actually end up sending too little. But if it's the other, like in a different jurisdiction, for example, in the UK, £150,000 is an awful lot more than €150,000. So your client is going to get more money than they should have got, and then what are you supposed to do? How are you going to get it back off them? And a lot of them can be very difficult, to kind of go, well, it's your mistake, and it's not my problem, and it's just hassle you could do without. Another issue, because again the US banking system and the Irish banking system are so different, the money might go so far, kind of go missing for a while, and maybe eventually get to your client, or it goes so far, kind of hangs around in the ether for a while, and the next thing, a couple of weeks later, when you think it's done and dusted, it's landed back to you again. And every time it comes back, again, there are fees deducted in transit, so you're getting back less than what you sent, and meanwhile your client is getting really annoyed. There's also a risk, of course, of fraud. When somebody gives you bank details to send money to, how do you know that that is genuinely that person's bank account? Hard enough to do it, and it's a stress you can do without. And then, of course, you have when the clients are not happy with the exchange rate. And what we see very often is, particularly where there are beneficiaries of an estate, where an elderly person has passed away, the beneficiaries of the estate know that a property has to be sold. They have a fair idea of what the property is worth. So let's say it's for 100,000. There's me and there's my 3 siblings. So that's about 100,000 each. And then when they get the money, they only get £60,000. And what do they think? They think the solicitor, of course, has dipped their hand in and taken the shortfall. There's, what I suppose, there's none so stupid as those who do not want to understand. Again, it's hassle you could do without, like people ringing you up saying, yeah, but where's the rest of my money? And I'm going to report you to the Law Society, and all this kind of messing. Again, why would you be dealing with that kind of stress unnecessarily? A couple of more kind of scenarios that we often come across is where the client says to you, yeah, but I have an Irish bank account. I lived in Cork for a couple of years and I have an Irish bank account. And you say, absolutely fine. And you send the money to AIB or Bank of Ireland. And then the client goes and tries to get the money sent to America or Australia or whatever. And then they discover that they've got a 10 or 20,000 a day transfer limit, which is fine if the value is small. But I mean, your client could be dealing with 400,000 or 500,000. Are they going to log in every single day for 50 days to try and get the money sent on to them? And you can be absolutely sure that whatever the scenario, it's going to be your fault if you're the solicitor. Another one we come across often is where you have maybe co-owners of a property or siblings who are benefiting from an estate. Like you send every single one of them, let's say €20,000, but because their own local bank applies different fees and different charges and a different exchange rate, they all end up getting a different value. And I suppose the reality of families is that not everybody always gets on. And so if you hear from your sibling that they got more than you, I mean, that's immediately like a red cape to a bull. So they're going to be on the phone to you as a solicitor saying, where's the rest of my money? My sister got £300 more than I did, or whatever. And again, it's hassle that you could do without. If the clients are in particularly Australia, maybe West Coast USA, there's a lot of Cork-based people, for example, that have ended up in kind of the San Francisco area. You've got about an hour, I guess, of an overlap between our working time here and their time when they're awake there. And if you miss that time to phone them to clarify something, it's the next day. And if you're in court the next day, then it's the next day, and then it's next week, and then it's 2 weeks down the road, and you still haven't managed to get in touch with them. And meanwhile, they're waiting for their money, and you have it sitting here in your client account, and you can't pay it out. And it's just, again, stress and hassle that you can do without. And then the last thing, and we find it a lot with solicitors, they kind of go, oh well, no, but we always send like €100 of a test payment first to make sure the bank details we get are correct. That's fine, but depending on where the money is going, again, by the time the €100 arrives to America or to Australia or whatever, there could be 70 or 80 euros of it missing, and it's fees that have been applied to the payment en route. And number one, you have a really annoyed customer, and second of all, if the fees are higher than what you've sent, the money doesn't get there, so your test payment is completely pointless because the money didn't get there anyway because the fees were so high. So it just sort of eliminated the whole process. So I suppose in an ideal world, and solicitors don't live in an ideal world. In fact, you make your money from the fact that we don't live in an ideal world. But if you did, I suppose this is what maybe would happen. So, solicitors would never get involved in currency exchange conversations or negotiations. All payments out of your client account would be sent in euro, and you'd be using an IBAN and BIC, and you'd be going to a euro account. Payments in would always be received in. They come in euro, and it's the correct amount to the penny, and there's no messing and fooling, kind of deducting from your office account to balance things and taking stuff out of the client's account and putting it into the office account and trying to do repayments and all this kind of carry on. Clients would negotiate their own exchange rates directly with somebody, not you. You wouldn't get involved in it at all. Your overseas clients would undergo quite rigorous AML checks on top of the checks that you do locally, which kind of obviously would reduce your risk of inadvertently dealing with somebody that you probably wouldn't like to be dealing with if you had your choice. Clients would benefit from excellent exchange rates. They'd have no fees to pay, and they'd get very fast payments. There would be somebody available at the end of a phone that you can talk to, and that you can verify bank information if you get that from your clients. And then finally, clients would be able to access an expert themselves, and any queries they have about the rate, about is it a good time to make your transfer, what's the rate today, if I hold tough, what are the benefits of that, I actually want to split the money completely, I want to send 20 to my daughter in Australia, I want to put 20 to my son in Scotland, and I want the rest of it to go to somebody else, that somebody would be able to step in and field all that queries. And I suppose in this ideal world, this kind of process would be available, and it actually wouldn't cost the solicitors anything. So I suppose that's where Currencies Direct will come in. So if you decide to start sending your clients to Currencies Direct for their currency exchange transactions, this is what it will look like from your perspective. So all you need to do is send your clients an email or a phone call and just say, listen, we can send the money through our office if you like. We have no control over the exchange rates. Our experience is that funds sometimes bounce back to us, or there can be quite a delay in the money actually arriving. However, there is an alternative. You can deal with a currency specialist company. If the thing is handled carefully by them, you will end up with a better exchange rate and the money will get there quickly. Would you like us to introduce you to Currencies Direct, Margaret, Horan, whoever? If a client says yes, then you just email us with their phone number and their email address, and then you just step out of it completely at that point. We'll onboard the client, we'll do our AML checks, and we will come back to you looking for our documents to prove source of funds. So that's usually a sale contract, or it could be a grant of probate or will or whatever. For incoming payments, then the correct amount will arrive in your client account. For outgoing payments, then the client will email you with our Euro account details. So that will be an IBAN and a BIC, and they'll instruct you to send us the money. So before you set up your payment, then we would ask you to please give me a call or one of my other colleagues in our team in Ireland, and we'll be able to confirm to you that yes, this is a correct Currencies Direct number. So you're not sending the money to some prince in some African country or anything like that. The money is going to Currencies Direct, and it will be safe. And then once we get the money in, we'll get back to you the next day and we'll say we've got the money. If we're expecting money and it hasn't arrived, two days later, we'll ring you and we say, haven't received that, can you just check with your bank that it was sent? So it means that if there are any issues or glitches or backlogs or bottlenecks in the system, we're identifying them really quickly, and you're not waiting for 2 weeks until your client comes back to you and says, I never got my money, this is ridiculous. We're on it very quickly and we're preempting problems. So solicitors then, of course, will ask us, from my client's perspective, is it simple? Because the last thing they want is to introduce their client to a third party and then the client come back and go, that was an awful ordeal, So from the client's perspective, it's equally simple. So again, registration is really quick. We look for a few personal data points, name, address, date of birth, occupation, that type of thing from your clients. Typically, once we speak to a client, the account will be active within 2 to 3 hours, depending on how quickly they get us the required documents. In terms of the ID requirements, then it's passport or driving license, proof of address. We do ask them to do a facial scan, so they need to hold their phone up in front of their face and just scan their face. If people are elderly and they're not able to do it, we kind of have workarounds. Sometimes it can mean that me or one of my colleagues, if the person is in Ireland, we'll actually go and meet your client like face to face in a coffee shop or at their house or whatever. So we will flex to suit what your client requires, rather than requiring your client to flex to suit what we need, I suppose. And then in terms of our AML checks in the background, we have access obviously to, court reports, to companies' registration office documents, to the likes of Stubbs Gazette, to all the media reports, all that sort of stuff in, like whether it's Canada, Australia, the United States or whatever. And this is why we're able to pick up, as I said earlier, things like PEPs, things like people that have maybe coloured sort of a history in terms of their activities, people that might be either deliberately or inadvertently engaging in money laundering, depending on who they're connected with and all that sort of stuff. So we will come back to you and kind of say, listen, we're not in a position maybe to provide a service for your client, in which case, as I said, you possibly shouldn't be doing it either, So each client then, if they pass our checks, they're introduced to their own dedicated currency trader. That person will be either in our team in the UK, or we also have a team of trading personnel in our offices in Florida. So as I was saying earlier, for example, if somebody's in San Francisco, obviously it makes sense for them to speak to the people in Florida, because there's more of an overlap in terms of the time. For incoming payments, we'll tell them so exactly how many dirham they need to achieve 350,000 euro or US dollars or sterling or whatever it is. So the money will arrive into your client account on time, in the exact right value and the right currency. So the other thing as well is that, because behind a client's profile they sort of have access to various currency wallets, so they can hold, for example, US dollars and euro and sterling and whatever other currencies they operate in with Currencies Direct. So for example, if somebody is looking to buy a house now, they've signed a contract but they're not going to be closing for 6 or 8 weeks, let's say the dollar is quite strong against the euro at the moment, they can actually go and buy their euro value and they can hold it at Currencies Direct, and then they'll send it on to you 3 or 4 days before they're closing, because obviously you can't accept it before you're ready to proceed, and they don't want to be at the mercy of where the markets are when they're actually at closing. So again, it's just a really nice, neat little facility for them. For outgoing payments, we'll give the client the euro details to email on to you, and again, you phone us before you make the payment to make sure that everything is in order. When we get money in, if they're sending money to us, or whether you're sending money to us, the trader will phone up the client to say, listen, this is what the rate is today, this is what our forecasts are telling us. I suppose nobody has a crystal ball, but our sense is that sterling might get stronger, or our sense is that the dollar is going to weaken, or whatever it is, and then the client can kind of make an educated decision onto whether or not they want to go ahead and do the trade that day. Again, like, how many clients have asked solicitors, what do you think I should do? And you're going, I haven't a clue. So, it just means that they're talking to somebody who actually has a clue. But again, we don't have a crystal ball. So it's guidance rather than advice. I suppose that's the thing. So again, the client can opt to hold their value in euro or dollars or whatever they have with us until such time as they get a rate that they want, or they can convert all of it, or they can do it in piecemeal. Like, we've had clients that have done maybe 50,000 this week, 50,000 next week, 50,000 the following week, and the idea is that they spread the risk overall in terms of the currency, and if there's an upward movement in the time, they'll benefit from that. If there's a downward movement, they don't have as far to fall, so it works really well. And then, because we have local banking in all the different jurisdictions where we operate. So for example, in the US, our banking partners are JP Morgan Chase. In Canada, it's Bank of Montreal. And in the UK, it's Barclays, wherever it is. we're paying out of local accounts there. So our sterling is coming from Barclays in London to the client's UK-based account. Typically it'll arrive within a couple of hours. And I mean, compare that with a scenario where the money is kind of floating around in the ether somewhere for a couple of weeks. You know, again, why would you draw that hassle on yourself? So this is just a client that we've looked after recently, and an email that he sent to a solicitor, and I just thought, you know, it's really nice. So I suppose I've cropped out some of the email because, you know, he was giving out yards about the Irish process of probate and inheritance tax and all this kind of stuff. So thank you for the update. Hopefully this will conclude the process. While grateful for the proceeds, this has been an emotionally exhausting process. On a more positive note, my interactions with Currencies Direct have been excellent. Communication has been timely. Trader interaction is easy and professional. Exchange rates have been right at market. Having spent 8 years as a currency trader myself, I was pleased with the competitive real-time rates. Transfers of US dollar proceeds were received same day into my US account, and I appreciate your recommendation of their services. So, I mean, isn't that a fabulous recommendation? And I mean, this is a man who had spent 8 years as a currency trader himself, sorry. So, I mean, if he's not going to keep us honest, you know, who is? And just at the top of the slide there, I also put in our Trustpilot rating. So we're at 4.8 on Trustpilot with nearly 19,000 reviews. So again, I think that kind of speaks to itself. So if you have a client that needs help with currency, or you yourself have a query, this is our team in Ireland. So I cover Munster, down here in the bottom corner, and the top there, Helen Richards covers the Northwest. Our contact numbers and email addresses are here on the slide. And then Maria covers kind of Dublin and south of Dublin, so the southeast there. And again, you have Maria's phone number and email address there if you would like to contact it. And that's it. Thank you very much.